Hello and welcome to ET Now. I'm Ashwin Mohan and you're watching Amicus Curiae, your weekly guide towards brewing in the world of corporate law, tax and regulatory affairs. And this week, of course, the big story is the GST report that has been submitted to the government by the CEA panel. And this weekend on Amicus Curiae, we try to analyze the implications of that report and, of course, the impact that it will have on the rollout of India's most ambitious tax reform. And to throw more light on that front, we have three leading voices from the world of indirect tax: Uday Pimprilkar from EY, Amit Sarkar from Grant Thornton, and Sachin Menon from KPMG. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out time and joining me on the show this week. Uday, let me kickstart today's discussion by talking about the timing of this report. You know, it comes at a very interesting time. There is a political logjam, and there are concerns about effective functioning as far as the winter session of the parliament is concerned. And of course, the government continues to remain optimistic about the GST rollout by 1st April 2016. But many feel that it will be an uphill task, given that the state assemblies also, 50% of them have to give it a nod. What do you make of the timing of the report in this context?
So to our mind, the CA report was anyway supposed to come sometime in November, so it's kind of got delayed, and it was delayed primarily because a huge amount of activity needed to be done to get into it's not an easy task, right? And so the timing, it couldn't have been delayed beyond this if they wanted to catch on the winter session anyway. And I think the CA report, is a fairly good start to the winter session and this entire GST discussion. Better late than never, but I think it's a great report to kind of peg it for the future GST rollout. I think it's a good start.
All right.
In my mind.
All right. Amit, do you concur? The right momentum given to the GST debate in the parliament?
Well, the fact that the politicians are talking at the same time when the economists have submitted the report, I think is just happenstance. In the original scheme of things, it was not expected that there would be a logjam in parliament and there would therefore be an extension going into the winter session, and that the two main political parties will come and have a conversation. So I think the first question that you're asking is probably more of a coincidence than anything else. And as Uday was saying, you do not prepare a report so complex almost overnight. The conclusions, the analysis, the depth to which the report had to necessarily go through does take time. And the fact that it was only a week overdue is kudos to the way in which they've actually prepared the report.
Mr. Sachin Menon, you've been an indirect tax veteran over several years. Finally, we have the report being submitted. We're on the brink of it being discussed in the parliament. What are your preliminary reactions to this report being submitted?
Well, I think this could not have come at a time better than this, because of the standoff between opposition and ruling party. And we expected that since the time when the NIPFP report came and it recommended a rate ranging from 15% to 27%, it created a lot of ripples around the industry. And everybody said that what kind of report is this? It is varying such a huge band of variation on a report. How can that be practical? And that is how the Arvind Subramanian report is commissioned and then started working. The challenge is that you have the consumption details state-wise as far as goods are concerned. Whereas as far as service is concerned, there is no such reliable details available. So the economists also have a challenge in figuring out what is the consumption, what could be the revenue neutral rate in this scenario. There are different variants to the revenue neutral rate. If you notice, the reports say that the revenue neutral rate could be 15 to 15.5%. Whereas if you are making differential tax regime like an exempted category, then you have a standard rate of 12%. And then if you take the remaining into it, then that revenue rate would be 17 to 18%.
Absolutely. In fact, on that line, on that point, Sachin, I'll come back to you, but I want to quickly check with Uday as well. Does this revenue neutral rate of 15 to 15.5% keep India in line with other jurisdictions when it comes to reasonable indirect taxes?
Surely. It is definitely far better than anything about 20 or 25. In fact, there was a rumor just about a couple of weeks back, and everybody was worried that the rate kind of suggested would be around that range. A 15% revenue neutral rate and even a standard rate of 18 or 19%, while it is slightly high to my mind, but it still gives a chance for a fairly good compliant society. Anything above 20%, 22% has a huge amount of repercussions on the nature of the tax administration, on the nature of how compliant the society would be, and all of those softer aspects.
So this comes definitely as welcome relief, the revenue neutral rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's just no doubt about it.
All right. I want to quickly get Amit as well on over here, and let's look at some of the other key proposals in the report. Now, the report says that the policy choice could be to have a multi-rate structure, in which case the lower rate for goods could be 12%, 6% center, 6% states, and the standard rate for goods and services could be 17 to 18%. That's right. Amit, help us understand, if recommended, how would this change the dynamics in the current tax system?
Well, if you look at it from the eyes of the state taxes, the VAT, this two-rate structure, a concessional rate for certain items and a standard rate for all the other goods is something which is what the industry is always familiar with. If you look at probably from an excise perspective, then the standard rate actually encompasses a large majority of the goods, and then there are the exemptions and certain demerit goods and things like that. One way of looking at this and probably understanding it is to see both the schedules having an amalgam. So you actually have broadly 3 rate groups, not to mention obviously the products on which there would not be any GST, the exempted list. And as the committee report summary itself is speaking about, the key is obviously what will go in the exemptions. So the way I see it, it was expected to have a lower rate of goods, lower rate of tax for certain goods. It was hoped that there would be a similar concession given to services. Well, that's what the committee has vociferously said. We would not be looking at it. We should be looking at all services coming at standard rate. And of course, the standard rate is what will be the revenue buoyancy or the revenue neutral rate that the government is that the economic committee is recommending. So that's where we are looking at the rate structure.
All right, Sachin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah. So see, when you say the revenue neutral rate is say 17 to 18%, it is not going to be perhaps 17 to 18%. The reason is that the assumption here is that the service and goods are taxed at the same rate, then it is 18%. Or 17 to 18%.
So it depends on various factors.
Supposing if the government decides that the service tax rate today is 14.5%, and jacking up to 18% may create a kind of ripple in the industry, therefore let us keep it at 16%, then the revenue rate for the goods would jump from 18% to 20%. So there are so many assumptions which is built in this scenario. But having said this, this is really which would rather give a impetus to the kind of reconciliation,
the dialogue which is ongoing between the Congress and the BJP.
Both BJP and the state government. Therefore, I would believe that this is the right beginning, and also that they talked about how this should be further modernized or improvised later.
Later on.
Yeah.
All right. Uday, let's also get in your perspective on the third part of the proposed multi-rate structure, and that is, of course, the higher rate of 40% on some items like cigarettes, aerated drinks, luxury cars. What kind of an impact do you think this will have if it's rolled out, especially on sectors like the auto sector, the FMCG sector? How do you look at this move by the panel?
Well, I mean, it is for the society to decide which are the the sin goods are anyway slightly easier, but which are the luxury goods to kind of tax at a higher rate. I think it is again the government the government's prerogative to define certain rates at the higher, certain goods at the higher rate. And as long as that particular basket is not very big, okay, and it's imposing that tax on sin products, I think it's not as if it's not justified. They also needed to actually factor in for products which are fairly well regulated.
All right.
Okay. And that's why I think the automobiles coming there and luxury automobiles coming in the segment of 40% is a understandable move. That particular sector is extremely regulated. Non-compliance on that product would be fairly low, and so on and so forth. The point is, I liked that. I would say that that move is understandable primarily because of the fact that the basket is not very big.
All right. Do you agree with that the basket is not very big?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, at the end of the day, these are recommendations. if the politicians or the policymakers or the empowered committee says, okay, we have the avenue to have a list of
They have a bigger mandate to take care of.
So let's put more into the bucket. Then what happens? So my fear is that let's put more into the bucket. Then what happens?
Sachin, do you think this recommendation will pass muster with the government?
This is nothing new. We already have sin taxes, but we are not calling it as sin taxes. Now, luxury segment cars are already attracting, I think, 35% of duty already now. So you are talking about another 5%.
5%.
And if you look at cigarette, it's also in the higher category. There are so many items which are already in the higher category. So there is nothing new to us, and it is.
It's just a minor hike, you're saying.
It's a minor hike, and it is prevalent across the world for that matter. I mean, the concept is that either to distort consumption or tax the super rich, which is very well go with the script. And I don't find that that is a big concern. And end of the day, that doesn't make much of a difference to the revenue rate anyway, because the contribution from that segment is not that high as it would twist that rate and take it to another level.
We've discussed most of the key rates that have been proposed by the panel. If you could illustrate with the help of examples in some other countries, what are some of the prevailing rates in some other countries? Help us understand how this proposal tries to align India with some of the international best practices.
So at a basic level, to my mind, and I'll allow others to also possibly add in, but to my mind, the emerging economies or the developing economies, okay, have a slightly lower rate, or in the rates between 10 to 15%, or maybe at the most about slightly more than that. It is the developed economies, which are far more compliant societies, which can even afford to have rates higher than 20-25%. Okay. The moment you kind of jack up that rate beyond that 20%, I think the overall compliance and the collection would have a negative impact. So this is a fairly pragmatic move. I think this is also a move, or other, even if it is the particular study also to some extent aligns with what the industry expected the rates to be. I mean, if you look at the tax to GDP ratio, I think to that extent, I think it's good. It also talks about several other things, the report. It talks about the fact that you need to get the tax system rationalized, the tax base rationalized, expanded. It also talks about the concessional rate for a number of products to be hiked up to be reasonable rates and not kind of impose very, very low rates on some of the items.
So in a nutshell, it's in line with some of the international global best practices.
Absolutely.
All right. So on that note, we'll have to slip into a short break. Stay tuned to ET Now and keep watching Amicus Curiae. We'll be coming back shortly on the other side. Welcome back to Amicus Curiae. We were discussing the implications of the GST report submitted by the CA panel. Now let's look at one of the most important recommendations, and that is, of course, the recommendation to scrap the 1% additional tax on interstate transactions. Sachin, let's start with you. How do you think this proposal will help create a national market? Because that, of course, is the ultimate objective of the government.
I think that is a very rational recommendation, and I think it is expected from a person like Dr. Arvind Subramanian, because this is actually distorting the entire supply chain and the cost structure.
All right.
Just imagine a case where the industries which are having job work units or maybe some processing happening in another plant for economic reason has to pay 1% additional tax for sending it out and getting it back again another 1%. And mind you, this will be forming as a cost of the product, the cost of manufacture, which again subject to GST later. So there is a kind of cascading impact on the taxes. And therefore, this 1% is actually screwing up the entire supply chain also, because even the decision as to whether you have one central warehouse or you should have multiple warehouses have a bearing on this 1% as well, because that would perhaps be irrational, given that 1% is leviable in case if you are transferring to your stock to your own warehouse, which is becoming a cost to you. And maybe from the subsequent transfer also inviting another 1%.
It would have led to a lot of practical difficulties.
It would have completely distorted the supply chain structure.
All right.
Therefore, it is in the scheme of things that it is recommended to be scrapped. Not only that, this 1%, is the argument of 1% is that those states which have they are net exporting states,
all right,
losing the CST revenue, And for example, Maharashtra said that we are losing about 8,000 crores. But they also need to take into consideration that when the goods are purchased by Maharashtra, there are goods flowing into Maharashtra and going out of Maharashtra.
Out of Maharashtra as well. Okay.
So there also this 1% is to be paid out. So actual loss is not that 8,000 crores. It is between the net between the export sales from Maharashtra to other states and purchases from other states. So the loss which you are talking about is not to that extent.
Perhaps a little exaggerated.
It is a little exaggerated.
Amit, do you concur with that? Because he clearly seems to be making a point that this is an irritant that had to be weeded out.
Well, it was an irritant which came in the first place, and one needs to look at why it came in the first place. It's not like as if the government or the policymakers had just wanted to bring it in, for no rhyme or reason. It was a compromise formula. The economists are saying that this compromise formula is an irritation and needs to be weeded out, which is fine. But will the state governments agree? The whole reason why it was brought in was because a section of the state governments, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab, Haryana, they were all saying we are fearful of the revenue loss. We are fearful about the loss of revenue on account of entry tax and octroi going away. Allow us to continue to have octroi and entry tax in some form or the other within GST. Now, how will the central government be able to convince the state governments politically to allow additional tax to go off? That is the biggest question in my mind. I'm a big, votary in favor of not having additional tax for sure. But the whole reason why it came in the first place is something which I want to know whether that reason has changed.
All right. Uday, let's move on from this aspect to some of the other recommendations, and that is relating to exemptions. What do you make of the panel's push for maximum number of items to be covered under the standard rate, which would of course depend upon the exemptions, and they want exemptions on about 90 items. What are your thoughts on this aspect?
Again, it's a strong direction that is being recommended towards having a very rational and mature tax system. The more you kind of get products into exemption list, the more you distort the supply chain a little bit. Okay. It also is, exemptions and a plethora of exemptions are actually portray an economy which is not out there and not a mature economy. It actually portrays a lot of lobbying, a lot of kind of political decision making that goes into it. And so I think it needs to be, the tax base needs to be fairly big for the overall standard rate to be reasonable.
All right.
So that I think is a given. I just want to add something on the additional tax bit. I have a slightly different view on this. I think when you're starting off with a tax reform, you need to be slightly more purist than being pragmatic. I understand the political compulsions and so on and so forth. And to that extent, I think that 1% additional tax coming into as a compromise was a huge compromise. It actually diluted the entire tax reform majorly and materially, and I entirely agree with Sachin on this. And the recommendation should be expected from a person like Mr. Subramaniam of kind of taking it away. The second is that I suspect that the overall negative impact, on the additional tax that was initially intended to cover is far lower. And in fact, it's the same with, let's say, a Swachh Bharat cess without credits that they have introduced right now. They intended to cover only a part of that overall loss. But then the levy that was kind of thought of, people wanted to kind of give it such a wide import that the overall collection and the cascading impact would have been much, much higher than what was intended.
And that's the point, in fact, that Sachin raised, that perhaps the kind of losses or the extent of losses was maybe a little exaggerated. On that note, Sachin, help us understand the rationale behind the proposal of the CAA panel that the final rates will be now decided by a proposed GST council, and also they have recommended that the rates should not be constitutionalized. Help us understand the rationale or logic behind this proposal.
Well, so it was very clearly mentioned in the powers of GST Council that the decision of what rate should be is actually with the GST Council. So anyway, the committee cannot go beyond that for that matter. So from that perspective, if you look at the GST Council has the power to decide what could be the, whether to reject or accept the recommendation. So end of the day, it rests with the GST Council. So that's reiterated. And exemptions are concerned, it is not recommendation of this CA committee. It was there in the beginning as a very clear guidelines. The rules of the game is that the exemption is going to be restricted to 99. That is at 90 now, but the original proposal at 99, and there was no reason why it is 99 or 90. That's what it is said. So within that corners, he is supposed to compute what could be the RNR rate, and what is that what he did for that matter. What is the next question you are talking about?
The next question was about the fact that why has it been recommended to not constitutionalize the rates?
Yeah, well, so I think this recommendation to include a tax rate in the constitution is something which is unheard of. There are reasons for that matter. Supposing the rate is put into the constitution, and today, after almost 30 years, somehow we have a government with a two-third majority, and even still they don't have majority in Rajya Sabha. That's why we are seeing all the circus surrounding the passage of GST bill.
All right.
Assuming a situation, you put a rate, and it is not sacrosanct that once rate is put, after 100 years also the rate will remain, because the economy is changing, the social environment is changing, economic factors are changing. So it may warrant a change in the rate, maybe downwards or upwards. And should that happen, and you put that as a rate in the Constitution Amendment Bill, then again and again, any point in time, if you have to change the rate, one has to move a Constitution Amendment Bill, and that needs two-third majority to pass.
That will again become an administrative nightmare. You know, on that note, I'll have to quickly take closing comments because we're running out of time on the show. I'll start with Uday. Brief comments on perhaps is there anything which has been left unaddressed in this particular proposals by the CEA panel, and also how optimistic are you of the passage of the GST constitutional bill in the winter session of the parliament?
Okay, I'll take the second one first. I am a huge optimist generally. Okay, I think the fact that now the discussions are around 2 or 3 points, that itself is a big step forward. And I genuinely think that I think a compromise should be reached.
So you're optimistic?
I'm definitely
Amit,
optimistic.
I'll have to ask you a question because I know you wanted to make a point on something that has been perhaps left unaddressed. Please go ahead, closing comments.
No, so first and foremost, looking at the passage of the bill, I am with Uday. Although I have been slightly cautious, over the last 12 odd months, but now I am getting optimistic.
Any gaps in the panel report?
Gaps in the panel report, no. In fact, the panel report kindly softly nudges the ruling party to listen to the Congress, saying that, look, there are some rational recommendations in what the Congress party was talking about. So hopefully that will give the politicians some kind of enabler to allow themselves to elegantly accept and therefore be able to reconcile.
All right, on that note, I'll have to ask the million-dollar question. Yes or no answers from all three of you. 1st April 2016, do you think GST will happen? Yes or no?
No.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
No, it could be 1st of October 2016, could be a realistic date.
All right, on that note, we have come to the end of this episode of Amicus Curiae. And of course, now all eyes will be on a crackling winter session of Parliament. Our panel, of course, is not too optimistic about the GST implementation deadline of 1st April 2016 being met. But of course, now the ball is in the court of the government. On that note, let me thank Uday, Amit, as well as Sachin for taking out time and joining me on this special edition on the GST panel report on Amicus Curiae. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking out time.
Thank you.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Amicus Curiae. This is Ashwin Mohan signing off. See you next week.